Well, thank you very much for joining me on this video. I want to talk to you today about something that the Canadian Real Estate Association has introduced recently called the Realtors Cooperation Policy. And it's going to be of a special interest to you if you're in the habit of ever listing a property exclusively, or if you use the coming soon sign riders on a property that you're going to be putting on the market, because it will impact on the way you do business in those two areas. First of all, by way of review, and you probably already know this, but if we're part of organized real estate, and I'm talking separately from the licensing program under RICO, but if we're part of the MLS system, we must belong to the local board. And if you belong to the local board, then you belong to the Ontario Real Estate Association. If you belong to the Ontario Real Estate Association, you belong to the Canadian Real Estate Association. And these are support groups that are meant to enhance and help our business. They're lobbying groups, but they also set some guidelines when it comes to code of ethics. When we think of code of ethics, we think of RICO and RICO's code of ethics, and indeed that's the gold standard, if you like. But the Canadian Real Estate Association also has a code of ethics that they've implemented. Now, if there's a contradiction between the Canadian Real Estate Association code of ethics and RICO, RICO prevails. But what is introduced at the Canadian Real Estate Association trickles down to the Ontario and then to the local board and is implemented in the local board. And recently, the Canadian Real Estate Association has introduced a new rule that impacts on the way you're taking a listing. And what they're doing basically, if I can simplify the whole thing, is they're doing away with exclusive listings. What they're saying is that when you take a listing, within 3 days of the time you begin publicly marketing that property, it must be on the MLS. Let me say that again. When you take a listing, within 3 days, and I didn't say take an MLS listing, when you take a listing, within 3 days of the time you begin publicly marketing that property, it must be on the MLS. And it says 3 days, not 3 business days. So if you take the listing on the Friday, or maybe you took it a week before, but you begin marketing it on the Friday, it's got to be on MLS by the Monday. There are exemptions. Exemptions are commercial property, including farms, agricultural property. Exemptions are new build subdivisions, and exemptions are rental properties. But apart from that, it impacts what we do in our normal trading in real estate on a day-to-day basis. What do they mean by public marketing? Well, what they mean is any representation of a listing to the general public. And that includes flyers. It also includes yard signs. It includes digital marketing, and it includes your website or a general website. It includes IDX and VOX. It includes your brokerage website. It includes newsletters, and on it goes. Any representation of a listing that goes out to the public is considered a public marketing. And what CREA is saying is once you do that with any listing you have, it must be on MLS within 3 days. Now, they do say if you have, we'll call an exclusive, if you have an exclusive listing, you're not doing any public marketing. You're allowed to pick up the phone and call another realtor at another real estate firm and tell them about it. But you can't do a mass blitz of telephone marketing. You can't somehow communicate with offices, other cooperating offices, but one-on-one if you got a friend in the business who you think can help do it. It's almost like how you might treat a pocket listing. Now, there's another interesting thing here. Is they're saying when you go to take a listing, you must go over with the seller, specifically the benefits of MLS. You got to tell them, among other things, you got to tell them it will give them greater exposure. The chances are they will receive more offers, and the chances are they will get better offers with a higher price and better terms. You've got to tell them that. And they said, we understand that a seller may want to list exclusively, and they want to list exclusively because it's private. They don't want people to know they're selling. Okay, you're allowed to do that. But when you do that, you've got to get a disclaimer that's presented to the seller, and the seller signs it. And in that disclaimer, it states that they understand by not listing MLS, they are reducing the potential exposure for the property. They're limiting the number of offers that may come in, and they may greatly reduce the price or the terms that they could get. So they've got that written confirmation from them, and then somehow you make a public marketing. You, in spite of the fact they've directed you not to, You make a public marketing somehow. You put a sign on the lawn, or you send out a flyer, or you send out a neighborhood flyer. We've just listed such and such. Anything like that, it's a public marketing. Then this rule comes into effect, and in spite of what the seller told you, in spite of what they signed, it's got to be on MLS within 3 days. Now, I want you to know that this will have a trickle-down effect. It starts at CREA, but CREA will dictate the policy to the board, and your local board has to implement it in their bylaws, and at least this level. They could make it 2 days instead of 3, but they can't extend it beyond what CREA is putting in place. The effective date, we've got some time yet. The effective date is January the 3rd, 2024. So the 1st of next year, it's got to come into effect. Let me take a minute. I don't normally do this, but I'm going to pontificate a little bit, and let me tell you my reaction. Let me start by saying I'm a big believer in MLS. I think if you look in our board, you'll find that the vast majority of listings that are sold are listed with one firm and sold with a cooperating firm. That's through MLS. I understand that. But I think this rule undermines the sovereignty of a brokerage operation. I think these are individual companies that should have control of their own policy, and this oversteps that. We go way back to the idea of an exclusive listing. When you would say to Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I would like the privilege, instead of sharing it with all the other brokerages in town, I think I can sell it myself, and I would rather have all of a reduced commission than half of a larger commission. And so I would like to have the privilege of doing this exclusively. And way back, you'd call when you saw an exclusive listing, and you'd ask them if they cooperate. Well, Rico stepped in and said that you have to allow any potential buyer to see the property, so you have to cooperate. And I'm not suggesting that exclusive is the way to go, not at all. What I am suggesting, though, is that a service organization, whether it's the local board or whether it's CREA or whether it's a REIA, is there to support what the brokerage is doing, make sure it's at a level playing field, make sure people are being ethical in the way they do business, but I don't think they should interfere with the business model, and this does. And I think probably if somebody were to challenge it, I don't think it would stand up in court. Having said all that, I wanted to make sure you understood the background of it, understand that it is agreed and put into place on the CREA level and is going to be implemented by January the 3rd. And so keep that in mind. It will impact how you take listings if you're ever in the mind of taking an exclusive listing, and it will impact if you use just coming soon as a rider on your sign. I want to thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I'll talk to you again next week.